Hey everyone, ready to take your language learning up a notch?
Let's do it.
Today we're taking a deep dive into something called content and language integrated learning.
Or CLIL for short.
Yeah, exactly. CLIL. Have you heard about it?
I'm sure many of our listeners have at least come across the term.
Yeah, it's kind of been buzzing around
Yes.
for a while now. But we wanted to really unpack it
Yeah,
and see what it's all about.
definitely.
Because on the surface it sounds amazing, right?
It does.
Like who wouldn't want to learn, history and French at the same time?
It sounds very appealing, yeah.
Yeah.
Learn about the Roman Empire while perfecting your subjunctive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've got a stack of research here
We do.
from some big names in the field. And
We're going to look at what CLIL is.
yeah, let's define it.
Yeah. How it works, why it matters.
Yeah, and I'm curious too about, is it just a fancy new name for something we've been doing all along?
That's a great question.
Right.
Like,
Is it really that different from immersion or content-based instruction?
that's what we're going to find out.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right.
Let's dive in. So first things first, what is CLIL, really?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been reading all these definitions, and it's honestly a bit of a jungle out there.
I can imagine.
Right.
It's a bit of a...
Some people are saying it's this, some people are saying it's that.
Yeah, it can be a little fuzzy.
So help us out,
Well, let's start with Coyle, Hood, and Marsh.
Okay.
They define CLIL as a dual-focused educational approach,
Okay.
where an additional language is used for learning and teaching both content and language.
So,
That dual focus is really important.
okay, so there are two focuses.
Yeah.
So it's not just
It's not just teaching in a
Yeah.
foreign language.
All right.
It's about content and language.
okay, got it. So it's really like teaching history and French,
Exactly
not just
right.
history and French.
Yeah, and that's where it gets a little tricky because there's a lot of overlap with other approaches, like immersion programs,
Yeah.
content-based instruction,
Yeah.
and even English medium instruction.
So where's the line? Is CLIL just kind of this big umbrella term?
Well, some researchers like Sinos, Genesee, and Gorder, they do seem to think so.
Okay.
They argue that it encompasses a variety of ways to integrate language and content.
But
But then you have researchers like Lasagabaster and Sierra,
okay.
who make a very clear distinction between CLIL and immersion.
Okay, so what's the difference according to them?
Well, they say that immersion typically involves a language that's prevalent in the surrounding community.
So if you're in Quebec
Exactly.
and you're learning French.
Yeah, immersion makes sense.
Okay.
Whereas CLIL often uses a foreign language that's not commonly spoken in that context.
So it's kind of like bringing in something new
Exactly.
from the outside.
Bringing the world into the classroom.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So context matters. But okay, let's say we've sort of pinned down what CLIL is.
Okay.
Why is everyone so excited about it? What's the big deal?
Well, it goes beyond just learning vocabulary and grammar.
Yeah.
It's about developing what Meyer and his colleagues call pluraliteracies.
Ooh, pluraliteracies.
Uh,
That sounds fancy.
It's a mouthful, isn't it?
But what does it actually mean?
Basically, it means understanding how language shapes our grasp of a subject.
Okay.
So it's not just about knowing the words.
Mhm.
It's about using language
Yeah.
to think critically, to analyze, to problem solve within a specific subject area.
So give me an example.
Okay, imagine a student learning about ecosystems in a biology class taught in Spanish.
Okay.
They're not just memorizing the Spanish words for photosynthesis or food chain.
Right.
They're using the language to
Yep.
analyze complex processes,
Yeah.
debate ecological issues,
Okay.
maybe even write a persuasive essay arguing for conservation efforts,
Wow.
all in Spanish.
That's a whole other level.
Yeah.
But hold on, wouldn't that be super overwhelming for learners, especially if they're still grappling with the language itself?
That's where scaffolding comes in.
Scaffolding. Okay, break that down for me.
Imagine scaffolding as providing support structures to help learners reach their full potential without getting lost in the language.
Got it.
It could be anything from using visual aids and graphic organizers to breaking down complex tasks into smaller, more manageable steps.
So it's about providing that extra support
Exactly.
while they're learning the content and the language at the same time.
And it builds on the work of Cummins and his distinction between BICS and CLP.
Okay, more acronyms. I'm going to need you to spell those out for me.
Of course. BICS stands for Basic Interpersonal Communication Skills.
Okay.
Think everyday language.
Okay.
And CILP stands for Cognitive Academic Language Proficiency.
So that's the more like...
The academic stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, the more complex language you need for school.
Gotcha. So CLIL is saying that those two are connected.
Yeah, it highlights their interconnected nature.
Yeah.
You know, your everyday conversations help lay the groundwork for that more complex academic language.
So it's all building on each other.
It is.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I got to say, in my research, I came across some studies that kind of gave me pause.
Oh.
There was one by Dalton Puffer,
Okay, yeah.
and she observed that in CLIL classrooms, it was actually a lot of teacher talk
Okay.
and not enough opportunity for students to actually use the language themselves.
Yeah, that can happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Like if the teacher's so focused on delivering the content,
Yeah.
maybe they forget to actually let the students practice.
Right. They might fall back on more traditional teaching methods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which makes me think about this idea of focus on form
Yes.
that Leister talks about.
Exactly.
So how does that fit into CLIL?
Focus on form is all about seamlessly weaving language instruction into the content flow.
Okay.
So instead of interrupting a fascinating discussion on ancient Roman architecture, for example, with a dry grammar lesson on verb tenses,
Right.
the teacher might subtly highlight how the past tense is used to describe historical events, all while keeping the students engaged in the captivating world of Roman engineering.
Okay, so it's like sneaking in the language learning.
Kind of. It's about making it natural and integrated.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
Now, I keep hearing about this language triptych.
Ah, yes.
Is that something we need to unpack?
We do. It's a really useful framework for thinking about language in CLIL.
Okay, lay it on me. What is this language triptych all about?
It breaks down the role of language in CLIL into three parts: the language of learning,
Okay.
the language for learning,
Okay.
and the language through learning.
Okay, whoa. Lots of languages happening here. Can you break those down a little further for us?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So the language of learning is the subject-specific vocabulary.
Okay, so like if you're learning about the solar system, you need to know the words for planet, orbit, asteroid.
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
Then you have the language for learning.
Okay, what's that one?
This is the language you need to actually participate in the classroom.
So like asking questions, explaining your ideas.
Exactly. Things like, can you explain that again? Or, I agree with your point, but...
Okay, so it's like the
Yeah.
language of interaction.
Yes. It's about using language to learn, not just learning the language itself.
Got it, got it. And the last one, language through learning, that's the one that sounds kind of mysterious.
It is.
Like, what is that?
This is the language that emerges organically as students are grappling with new ideas.
Okay.
It's unpredictable, spontaneous, and it arises from the learning process itself.
So it's like the language of discovery, maybe.
Exactly. It's the language of aha moments.
I like that. But with all this focus on language, I'm wondering, how do we make sure students are actually mastering the content? Like, how do we even begin to assess learning in CLIL?
That's a really important question, and one we'll definitely dig into more later on.
Okay, good, because I have a lot more questions about that.
But the key takeaway for now is that assessment should align with your teaching practices.
Okay.
So if you're scaffolding instruction and encouraging authentic communication, your assessments need to reflect that.
So no pop quizzes on obscure grammar rules then?
Probably not the best approach. We want to get a true picture of their learning, both the content and the language.
Gotcha. But I feel like we've just scratched the surface here.
We have.
There's so much more to explore.
There is.
Like this whole idea of translanguaging
Yes. We need to talk about that.
and how CLIL might actually change the way we think about teaching English as a subject.
Absolutely. There's so much to unpack.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's keep diving.
Let's do it. All right, let's talk about translanguaging.
Oh yeah, translanguaging. That's one I've been wanting to dig into.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Because I keep hearing it everywhere.
It's kind of a game changer.
It is, right? But I'm still not 100% sure I get it.
Okay, well, the basic idea is that it challenges this traditional view of languages as separate boxes.
Okay.
You know, you have your English box, your Spanish box, your Mandarin box,
Right.
and you're supposed to keep them all nice and tidy.
Yeah, don't mix them up.
Don't mix them up. But translanguaging says, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Real-life multilingual people don't actually think or speak that way.
No, they don't.
Right. They draw on all their linguistic resources in a fluid and dynamic way.
Yeah, they mix and match.
They mix and match. They code switch. They translate in their heads. They borrow words and phrases.
And they do it all seamlessly.
They do. It's amazing.
It is.
And May argues that traditional language teaching often has this, monolingual bias.
Yeah.
It ignores all these rich linguistic resources that students bring to the classroom.
So instead of telling them to check their native language at the door,
Exactly.
we're saying, bring it in. Let's use it.
Let's leverage it for learning.
Okay, I like that. So how do we actually do that in a CLIL classroom?
Well, Lin's multimodalities and textualization cycle provides a really nice framework for this.
Okay, another cycle. I'm sensing a pattern here.
Maybe cycles are just how learning works. Who knows?
Maybe. So how does this cycle work?
Well, it starts with immersion in a rich multimodal experience related to the topic.
Okay, give me an example.
Okay, let's say we're learning about ancient Egypt in a history class.
Ooh, pyramids.
Pyramids, hieroglyphs, the whole shebang. So students might watch a documentary, examine artifacts, maybe even build a model pyramid.
Okay.
And they're encouraged to use all their languages as they're doing this.
So they're activating their prior knowledge.
Exactly,
Steadily.
connections.
Making connections regardless of which language they're using.
Okay, that's cool.
Then they move on to engaging with an academic text in the target language.
Okay, so now they're really diving into the content.
Yeah, but here's the key.
Yeah.
They're not just passively reading.
Right.
They're encouraged to unpack the text using all their linguistic tools.
So they might translate parts of it.
They might discuss it with classmates in a mix of languages.
Okay.
They might even create visual representations of the concepts using both languages.
So they're really actively making meaning. They are. And finally, they intertextualize their learning.
Intertextualize, is that a real word?
It is. It's a fancy way of saying they produce something.
Okay.
It could be a report, an oral presentation, a piece of artwork, a song. The mode of expression is flexible.
Wow, so many options.
But the focus is on synthesizing their understanding and communicating it effectively.
Using all their languages.
Using all their languages.
I love this. But does the research actually back this up? Like, does translanguaging really work?
The research is still emerging,
Okay.
but early findings are promising.
Oh.
Studies have shown that when students are allowed to use their native language strategically, they're actually better able to grasp complex concepts, participate in discussions,
Wow.
and produce higher quality work.
So it's not just about inclusivity.
It's not.
It's about effectiveness.
It's about making the most of the resources students have.
I like it. But, okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the teachers. Because let's be real, implementing CLIL effectively sounds like a lot.
Like, what kind of training and support do teachers need to pull this off?
Well, first of all, they need deep content knowledge.
Okay, so they got to know their stuff.
You got to know their stuff.
But
they also need a strong understanding of language acquisition and pedagogy.
So they need to be skilled language instructors as well as content experts.
Exactly. It's a tall order.
Yeah, I can see how that could be a challenge.
And then, on top of that,
Yeah.
they need to be able to create a learning environment that supports both content and language development.
Wow.
So it's about planning lessons that target both sets of objectives.
Right.
Anticipating the challenges students might face.
Yeah.
And providing the right kind of scaffolding.
So it's not something you just pick up overnight.
Definitely not. It requires specialized training.
And are there programs out there for that?
There are more and more CLIL-specific teacher education programs popping up.
Okay, that's good to hear. And some countries are incorporating CLIL principles into their existing teacher training courses.
But I imagine there are still challenges, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like what?
Well, one study by Hootner, Dalton Puffer, and Smith found that content teachers in a CLIL program often felt more confident in their subject matter expertise than in their language teaching skills.
Which makes sense. I mean, if you're a history teacher who's suddenly asked to teach in French.
Right. It can be daunting.
Yeah.
And that's why ongoing professional development is so crucial.
Okay, so it's not just like, here's your CLIL training, now go forth and conquer.
No, it's a journey.
It's a process.
It is. And teachers need support along the way.
Gotcha. But okay, let's get to the result.
Okay, the million-dollar question.
Does CLIL actually work?
Well, the research is generally positive.
Oh, tell me more.
For example, Lorenzo, Casal, and Moore did a big evaluation of a CLIL program in Spain.
Okay.
And they found that students in CLIL classrooms actually outperformed their peers in traditional language classes.
Wow, really? In all areas?
In all 4 language skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing.
That's impressive.
And they also showed gains in vocabulary, grammar, and their ability to use academic language.
So it's not just about fluency,
It's not. It's about developing those academic literacy
which
skills.
is exactly what we want, right?
Exactly. And Ruiz de Zarabe's review of research on CLIL outcomes found similar positive results.
So this is consistent across studies.
It seems to be,
That's really encouraging.
yeah.
But I do have one nagging question.
What's that?
All this focus on language is great, but what about the content learning itself?
Ah, yes, the big concern.
Right. Does learning in a foreign language actually hinder students' understanding of the subject matter?
That's a common worry, but research suggests that when implemented effectively,
Okay.
CLIL can actually enhance content learning.
Really?
Yeah, for example, a study by Jeppin in Finland found that students who learned science and math through English, French, or Swedish did just as well as those who learned in their native language.
So they weren't at a disadvantage.
Not at all. And in some cases, the CLIL students even showed faster development in their conceptual understanding.
Wow, so maybe the challenge actually pushes them further.
It could be. It forces them to engage with the content in a more active and deliberate way.
I like that. But wait, you said when implemented effectively.
Right, and that's an important caveat.
Meaning?
Well, not all studies have found such unequivocally positive results for content learning.
Okay, so there are some cases where it hasn't worked as well.
Yeah, there have been some studies where CLIL students haven't performed as well as their non-CLIL peers.
Okay, what are some of the factors that might be at play there?
Well, one study by Engel and colleagues in Spain found that primary school students from less educated backgrounds who learned content in English performed worse than their peers who learned in Spanish.
So socioeconomic factors might play a role.
It seems so.
Okay, that's something to keep in mind.
Absolutely. CLIL is not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right, and we need to be sensitive to the diverse backgrounds and needs of our students.
Exactly. But I think we've covered a lot of ground here in terms of the theory and the research.
We have, yeah.
So I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Okay.
What are you most eager to learn about now?
Well, I'm ready to get down to brass tacks. What does CLIL actually look like in the classroom?
I'm glad you asked, because that's where the rubber meets the road, right?
It is. And I imagine there's no, like, one-size-fits-all model for CLIL classrooms.
You're right, there isn't.
Like, it's not a cookie-cutter approach.
No, definitely not. It varies so much depending on the age of the students,
Okay.
the subject matter, the target language, the context, you name it.
It's not like there's a CLIL recipe book we can just follow.
Exactly. But there are some core principles and practices
Okay.
that can guide effective CLIL implementation.
Okay, so let's talk about those. Like, what are some key things teachers should keep in mind when they're designing CLIL lessons?
Well, first and foremost, I'd say start with a crystal clear understanding of your learning objective.
For both content and language.
For both content and language, yes. So it's not just, okay, we're teaching this physics lesson in Italian.
Right.
It's more like, by the end of this lesson, students will be able to explain Newton's laws of motion in Italian NA, apply them to solve simple problems.
Okay, so you're really specific about what you want them to be able to do.
Exactly. You need to be intentional about identifying both the content knowledge and the language skills.
And this is where that language triptych comes in handy, right?
It does. Remember, the language of learning, the language for learning, and the language through learning.
Yeah, I'm starting to get the hang of it.
It's a really useful framework for planning.
Okay, so walk me through it. Like, how would a teacher actually use this in a lesson?
All right. Imagine a teacher planning a lesson on the solar system, but in Spanish.
Okay, I like it.
So first, they might pre-teach some key vocabulary like planet, orbit, asteroid.
Okay, so that's the language of learning.
Exactly. Then they might plan a group activity where students have to present their findings on different planets.
Okay, all in Spanish.
All in Spanish, yeah. And that would be tapping into the language for learning.
Right, they're using the language to communicate.
And then throughout the lesson, the teacher would be paying attention to any language challenges that come up naturally.
And that's the language through learning.
You got it. So it's like a roadmap for integrating language and content in a meaningful way.
Okay, I could see how that would be helpful. But what about scaffolding? I know we talked about it earlier.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering about specific strategies that teachers can use to support students in the classroom.
Oh, there are tons.
Give me some examples.
Well, one common approach is visual support.
Okay.
Think pictures, diagrams, graphic organizers, real objects, anything that helps make the content more concrete.
So, like, if you're teaching about plants, you might bring in some actual plants.
Exactly. Or if you're talking about fractions, you might use manipulatives.
Okay, so it's about giving them multiple ways to access the information.
And it's especially helpful for visual learners or students who are still developing their language proficiency.
Gotcha. What else?
Another strategy is adapting the language of instruction.
Meaning?
Well, you might speak a little slower,
Okay.
use shorter sentences, paraphrase complex ideas.
So it's about meeting them where they are, linguistically.
Exactly.
I remember when I was trying to learn Italian from my grandmother, she would talk so fast.
Oh, no.
I had no idea what she was saying half the time.
She needed to adapt her language for you.
I know, right? It's funny how we sometimes forget that.
We do, yeah. And it's not just about speaking the learning. Written materials need to be adapted too.
Okay, how so?
You can highlight key vocabulary, provide definitions, use visuals.
So it's all about making the language more accessible.
Exactly. But then there are times when students need even more targeted support.
Yeah, like what about grammar or specific language structures?
That's where explicit language support comes in. Think sentence starters for discussions, writing frames to guide written work, or strategies for decoding unfamiliar vocabulary.
So you're giving them the tools they need to succeed.
Exactly. And you can break down complex tasks into smaller, more manageable steps.
Okay, so they're not overwhelmed.
Right. And you provide language support at each stage.
It's like building a staircase to help them reach the top.
I love that analogy. But remember, the scaffolding should be gradually removed as students gain confidence.
So the goal is to make them independent learners.
Exactly. We want them to be able to tackle CLIL challenges on their own eventually.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about materials? Like, can teachers just use their regular textbooks for CLIL?
That's a good question. A lot of traditional textbooks aren't really designed for CLIL.
Okay,
They often assume a higher level of language proficiency,
right.
or they don't really address that dual focus on content and language.
Yeah, they might be missing that language support piece.
Exactly. But the good news is there are resources out there that are specifically designed for CLIL.
Okay, phew. So teachers aren't just left to fend for themselves.
No, not at all. Coyle, Hood, and Marsh have a really comprehensive guide
Okay,
that's considered kind of a must-read in the field.
so that's a good starting point.
It is, yeah. And then Dale and Tanner offer a fantastic collection of CLIL activities
Okay,
that you can adapt for various subjects and age groups.
so there's help out there.
There is. And don't forget about online communities.
Oh yeah, those are great.
There are so many CLIL teachers out there sharing ideas and resources.
It's a very collaborative field, it seems.
It is, yeah. It's really inspiring to see.
But okay, before we wrap up, we have to talk about assessment.
Yeah, the big A word.
Yeah. Because how do we fairly evaluate students' progress in both content and language when they're still learning the language?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. Like, we don't want to penalize them for their language limitations, but we also want to make sure they're grasping the content.
Right, it's a balancing act.
So how do we strike that balance?
Well, scaffolding and differentiation are key. Okay.
Just like we scaffold instruction, we need to scaffold assessment.
Okay.
Meaning you provide support, you offer multiple ways for students to demonstrate their understanding,
Okay.
and you're flexible in how you evaluate their work.
So it's not just about standardized tests.
Not necessarily, no.
This makes me think about translanguaging again.
Okay, yeah.
Could students use their native languages in assessments? Even if the assessment is designed for the target language.
That's a big debate in CLIL assessment.
It is.
Yeah. Some researchers believe it gives a more accurate picture of students' content knowledge,
Okay.
while others argue that it compromises the language learning goals.
So there's no easy answer.
Not really, no. It
Yeah.
really depends on the context and the specific goals of the program.
Right. It's about making thoughtful decisions based on the needs of your students.
Exactly. And the goals you're trying to achieve.
Okay, that makes sense. But, as we've been talking about all this,
Yeah.
I've been thinking that CLIL is about so much more than just language learning.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like it's challenging the way we think about education as a whole.
It is. It's pushing us to think about curriculum design, teaching, and even the nature of learning itself in a different way.
Yeah, like breaking down those walls between subjects,
Absolutely.
creating more integrated learning experiences.
Recognizing that language isn't just a subject to be studied, but a tool for thinking and learning across all areas of the curriculum.
Wow, that's powerful. So CLIL is kind of nudging us toward a more interdisciplinary and language-rich approach to education.
I think so, yeah.
And that's pretty exciting.
It is. It could be the key to equipping students with the skills they need for the future.
Well, I don't know about you, but my brain is full. This has been an amazing deep dive into the world of CLIL,
It has. We've covered a lot of ground.
and I'm honestly feeling really inspired.
Me too. It's such a dynamic and innovative field.
It is. And for all our listeners out there who are curious about CLIL,
Yes.
just remember, it's not a magic bullet.
It's not.
It's a journey of exploration, experimentation, and continuous learning.
So keep asking questions, keep diving deep, and keep pushing those boundaries.
Who knows? You might just be the one to discover the next big breakthrough in CLIL.
Exactly.
So until next time, stay curious, everyone.